Hey, Crawl Spacers, here. We're here with Jim Shooter, editor from 78, is that right?
Yes.
To
87.
87. And when I heard you were coming to Tulsa, you were the first person I signed up to come here. I'm just a big fan.
Well, thank you.
You were the first editor I ever saw a picture of in a comic.
Well, I'm Stan put his picture and then Steve and Jack I think it was in an annual early on, so it wasn't groundbreaking, but we felt like like it would be good for people to sort of know who they were dealing with.
Exactly. I always like to start at the beginning with your first exposure to Spider-Man. How old were you, or do you remember your first comic?
Yeah, I was 12 years old. I was in the hospital for minor surgery, and in a kids' ward in the hospital in those days, there were stacks of comic books everywhere. And the interesting thing was there were DC comics, and I'd stopped reading comics when I was like 8. I got bored with them. And so this is when I was 12. I guess it was 63. And so I looked around, and there were all these DC comics, and they were all in kind of pristine condition. I looked through a few of them.
Yeah.
And then there were all these dog-eared, ratty, read to death Marvel comics. Yeah. And I thought, what's up with these? So I think the first Spider-Man I read had, I think it was issue 7 maybe, The Vulture.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great, and there were others. So there are other back issues there that I read, and then I went out and started trying to hunt them down because I liked them so much.
It was harder to do back then, I imagine. There wasn't shows like this.
No, I didn't even know there were comic book conventions till 1973. I had no idea. I didn't know. I lived in Pittsburgh. This is way before there were comic book shops. So what you did is you went to the drugstore and you got what they had. The distribution was pretty spotty, but there were places that would sell comics with the covers half torn off and stuff like that. And I just wanted to read them, so I'd buy them anyway. They were only a nickel, so I'd buy those.
So you became the editor in 78. From the history I've read, Marvel was in tough shape in 78, is that right?
Very tough shape. I mean, I started there as an editor in 1976, and then in 1978 I became editor-in-chief. And at that time, Marvel was losing money. We were in bad shape, and it was owned by a small conglomerate. And basically, if we continued to lose money, they just would have shut it down. They didn't have any need to publish comics. The person who deserves credit for saving Marvel in those rough years, 76 through 78, is Roy Thomas. Because Roy, he wanted to do Star Wars, and no one at the company wanted to do the Star Wars adaptation. I didn't know. I was ambivalent. But Roy, he stamped his feet and held his breath till he turned blue, and finally he got his way, and we did Star Wars. And Star Wars, all by itself, kept Marvel alive from 1977 through 1978 until I could get it turned around.
Was Spider-Man in rough shape also? Was his books not selling in 78?
None of the books were selling. Basically, there was no direct market. There was just the beginning of the direct market and very small sales through the direct market. I'm talking like 700 copies for an issue or something like that. So almost everything was newsstand, and the percentage of sale in the newsstand just kept dropping and dropping and dropping. Not so much because the books weren't selling. It's just because honestly, the ID wholesalers just kept cheating more and more and more, because it was affidavit returns by then. They didn't have to show you any proof. They would you'd send them 5,000 books and they'd tell you they sold 500, and then and meanwhile they really sold 3,000. So that's just pure profit, and they'd only pay for the 500, So I mean, there was that kind of deal going on, and it basically each month it seemed like they were trying to cheat us just a little more. And that's why it was great that the direct market arose then. And it's probably one reason the direct market arose, because you couldn't get comics on the newsstand very well. The distribution was too bad.
The 80s is one of my favorite periods of Spider-Man history. Has a couple of my favorite writers, Roger Stern and Tom DeFalco. Yeah. Talk about those two on the book.
Well, Roger Stern started at Marvel 2 weeks before I did, and so we kind of, we were the new guys, so we kind of fell in together. And Roger had never written comics at that point, so and he's my friend. So I sat him down and I'm trying to give him the lecture and tell him all of the philosophy and the the real, intricate stuff, and he didn't get it, and then Len Wein, who deserves great credit, he had Roger do a fill-in issue of the Hulk, and because it was Roger's first work, he's telling him, do this, don't do that. I mean, real simple, kept it real basic. Roger did a great job, and then once he got his feet under him a little bit, once he learned sort of the boot camp basics, then he said, "Oh, I see what you mean about the conflict and about this and that," and then he went on to become a tremendous writer. DeFalco came to us after the DC implosion when everybody came to Marvel because we were the only place to go, and so he had been at Archie Comics actually, and Archie was doing going more and more reprint, I think, at that point, and so his first primary value to me seemed to be as an editor, because if there's one thing, I mean, Marvel had always been late before, and I was trying to make the trains run on time, if you know what I mean, and Tom seemed to have a good, solid footing there. I mean, because the trains always ran on time at Archie. So brought him in, and indeed, he was very good at that. I mean, I'd go in and I'd say, where does it stand on Spider-Man? And he'd say, I got 4 issues in the drawer, stuff like that.
As an editor, that's a good thing to hear.
Yeah, and so then, he started doing some writing work, and at first I think it was a little tough transition for him. But he caught on real well, and he started doing some really nice stuff.
The Amazing 252, the first appearance of the black costume, it was impossible for me to find. That book must have sold like gangbusters.
Oh yeah, I mean, first of all, I couldn't convince anybody at Marvel. I couldn't convince the circulation people. I couldn't convince the PR people that this was going to be a big deal. And I went to the PR people and said, we should do a press release. They said, no one will care. And I said, they will, And the circulation people said, we ought to up the print run on these things. And they were really afraid of that because, like I said, the newsstand, you were not getting, honest sales on the newsstand. And in the direct market, they ordered what they ordered, so you couldn't do much with that. And so it was such a sensation. It sold out immediately, and we didn't do things like go back to press in those days, only very rarely. And so it became it's amazing that a book that probably had 500,000 copies in print became rare.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, talk about that origin of the costume idea. From stories I've heard, and I want you to confirm or deny it, a kid sent in an idea in a letter about the black suit, and you sent him a check for a couple hundred, or I don't know.
Yeah, what happened was, I read more of the fan mail than I think anybody else in this business ever. Yeah. And I couldn't read it all. There's way too much of it. But we had all these high school interns who were just thrilled to work at Marvel Comics, and go photocopy this, run this down the hall, stuff like that. And yet they get to meet Walt Simonson, they get to hang out with Bill Sienkiewicz, they get to show their drawings to John Romita, and so they loved it, so we had those some of those kids, and I would have them go through the mail, and if there was anything like real interesting, put it in my pile. And so I read a lot of it. Well, anyway, I also read a lot of submissions, and this young man sent in a sample plot. He was trying to get a job as a writer, and the plot was he wasn't ready for prime time. He wasn't professional level yet, and the story in his plot was basically that Reed Richards creates a high-tech black costume for Spider-Man, and that was it. I mean, the only thing, the 2 words that he contributed were black costume. And I thought, yeah, the guy crawls around on the rooftops in the dark. Wouldn't you wear a black costume? So anyway, I called him up and I said, look, I don't know, we'll pay you for this. I think we gave him $500. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I'm going to use it, but I just want to be able to make sure that you're compensated somehow. And anyway, I think then we tried to train him. I think we brought him to New York and gave him a shot at trying to become a writer. and he just wasn't ready yet, you know. So, you know, I mean, we tried to play fair. So anyway, I threw that thing in the drawer, and I wasn't sure when it would come in handy. And then when we started on Secret Wars, I said, aha, black costume.
Talk about Secret Wars. Was it the Mattel that came up with the idea first, and you had to design a story around it, or what?
No, what happened was it starts with Kenner Toys licensing the DC heroes. So Kenner was going to have a line of superhero action figures based on DC characters. Well, Mattel didn't want to be the only giant toy company in town that didn't have superheroes. So they had Masters of the Universe, but what, you know, that's younger. So our people were always out there trying to, you know, get licenses and stuff. But anyway, somehow Mattel got in touch with us and was interested in our characters. And we had a meeting, and they said that the problem with the Marvel characters was that they weren't exposed enough. That everyone knows who Superman is, everyone knows who Batman is, everyone knows Wonder Woman, Robin, and blah blah blah. But you know, most people don't know Iron Man at that point. Anyway,
Robert Downey.
Yeah, really. And they said most people don't know who your Thor, and they said your characters just aren't that well known. And when people license things, they don't license ideas; they license exposure. Nobody licensed Star Wars because they thought it was a good idea. They licensed it because everyone in the world knew Star Wars. So anyway, the thing is, like, so we're sitting in a room, this room full of executives, licensing people, president of the company, and me, you know. And so the Mattel people said, if you could do some big event, publishing event, that we could get a lot of publicity and we could promote, and you could promote, and, you know, get some attention for these characters, then, you know, we'd be interested in licensing it. And so everybody sort of looks at me like, you know, well, Jim, what are you going to do? You know, what do you got? So the fact is that in the fan mail, which I read a lot of, almost every day, I'd get some letters suggesting, why don't you do one big story with all the major characters and all the major heroes, all the major villains together? And every time that someone would suggest that, I was like, oh, that'd be a nightmare. You know, but then, so I'm sitting there and they're all looking at me, and I said, why don't we do one big story with all of the, you know, major heroes and all the major villains in one story, make it 12 issues, you know, make it a big deal, you know, and publicize and all that. And they said, oh, that's brilliant. I'm like, okay, I'll take that. But anyway, it was really suggested in the fan mail all the time. And so Mattel liked it, and then we started working with them, and they did have some things that they asked us to do. They said, well, this is toys, so we need locations, we need play sets, you know, we need vehicles, we need, you know, we would like you to have Iron Man look more high tech, and especially for Dr. Doom to become more high tech, because they said he looked too medieval. And things like that. They wanted, you know, us to do some active things with the characters. And so I thought about it. I thought, I can work that into the story, and it won't even look like something that's bolted on. It'll be seamless in the story. So yeah, I can do that. Yeah. So then we went on from there. And once we satisfied their small issues, and also they had a focus group that came up with the name Secret Wars. That was theirs. I think I started off with Battle World or something.
Well, that was in there too.
Oh, really? Anyway, but at any rate, they said that kids responded well. People respond well to word secret, and also like Star Wars Wars, and so that they came up with that name. But I mean, once we satisfied their few little issues, I never heard from them.
As an editor, when you hear that there's going to be all your characters in one book, is that like, this is going to sell like gangbusters? Does that?
Well, I
like printing money, I guess.
Well, I figured it would probably sell pretty well. It was sold better than wildest expectations. Yeah, I mean, we figured, you know, especially since it was going to get promotion and there would be toys and we would benefit from the toy promotion, we figured that it would be a hit. But we didn't know how much of a hit until we got those first orders in. Wow.
Any idea how many it sold?
It was up near 1 million. Yeah.
they would kill for numbers like that today.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but you know, we had the direct market. We did a good job on the newsstand, and then we had all of these other smaller outlets like the military, and we sold comics through Western Publishing and so forth. So yeah, I mean, we had the total sale was really impressive.
So Secret Wars 2, after that success, we went to Secret Wars 2. Memory as a kid, the Beyonder learning how to use the bathroom from Spider-Man. You got to tell me about that.
Well, I mean, basically, I just tried to think it through logically, and here's a guy who is almost all powerful, and he comes to Earth, but he doesn't know anything.
Doesn't know how to pee.
Yeah, he has no idea, and I really like the idea that Peter Parker, who is probably more. Yeah, he's like anybody else, and so he's got to teach this godlike being, like how to go to the bathroom. And, yeah, well, cracked me up too, and I was writing it.
Talk about I bet you've heard some weird pitches for Spider-Man. I read online, you can see if this is true or not. Mantlo wanted to make Spider-Man an illegitimate father.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, that is true. And this is part of the problem being editor-in-chief. I mean, creative people come up with a lot of ideas, and some of them are bad. And so Bill told his editor, I think it was Danny Fingeroth, that he wanted to do this story where Spider-Man fathers an illegitimate child. And Danny said no, and then Bill kind of went over his head. Well, he actually, with Danny's permission, went over his head and came to me and said, I want to do this story. And I said, you don't understand, Bill. We sell these comics on a spinner rack that says, "Hey kids, wholesome entertainment." I said, they have the Comics Code seal on them. Still, at that point, I said, whether you like it or not, these are facts. I said, and we have a contract with Union Underwear that makes Spider-Man underoos that says we won't do that, and all these other, things. I said, I think we should do the most sophisticated stories we can, but we have to stay within certain bounds because we're contractually obligated. And also, they hired me to protect these characters, to protect these franchises, and you're not going to do that to Spider-Man. I said, do it in Epic Comics. Do exactly the same story. Call him Arachnid Man. I don't care if he's red and blue. Do whatever you want. Everybody will secretly know it's Spider-Man, but you can't do it in the mainstream Spider-Man books.
Any other bad ideas that came across your desk with Spider-Man?
Oh, lots of bad ideas. I mean, first of all, every time you get a new writer, the first thing they wanted to do was kill Aunt May. And I said, wait till your 50th book and kill Aunt May. I mean, once you get in there, that's different. But it's like anybody can go. Everybody wanted to go for the cheap drama, And I said, no. How about coming up with a good story? How's that?
Good idea. Distribution in the 80s, everywhere you went, you ran into a comic. They were on spinner racks. They were in bookstores. Now you have to search out a comic almost. What do you think of the distribution nowadays with comics?
I think it's terrible. I mean, I think what happened was when we were with the newsstand only, I told you what happened. I mean, they ruled us and they cheated us. And so then the direct market arose. And for a while, we had both. And the newsstand guys, to some extent, didn't want to have their little profit center taken away by the direct market. So they actually newsstand sales sort of stabilized, and they were afraid to cheat us too much because, for instance, we were actually getting negative percentage sell-through from Cleveland. Okay, from the distributor in Cleveland, we were selling minus 4%. It's like, how do you get returns larger than what you sent them?
Did the truck crash on the way to the store?
Or something, I don't know. Anyway, the thing is, like, what we surmised is that, and what they said was that the direct market stores would return comics through the ID wholesaler, and that's why we were getting negative percentages, but they still wanted their check.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we made history. Talked to Ed Shukin and talked him into it. He was a circulation guy. I said, let's cut off Cleveland. Let's stop dealing with the Cleveland ID. So we did. And I think other IDs noticed that. There was a time when, leg breakers would have showed up to, but other IDs noticed that and they didn't want to be cut off. And so, we were able to use both. We had both, and therefore neither one could really hurt us. And then during the time I was there, the direct market was so successful that Carol Kalish, Ed Shukin, and other people, they wanted to go all direct. And I kept saying, no, the newsstand, we have 70,000 outlets on the newsstand. That's the bait, you know. A reader goes and they discover the comic book because they walk past the spinner rack and they see G.I. Joe or Star Wars, and they know that, and they say, wow, let me try this, and they read it, and meanwhile there's a real interesting Iron Man cover right next to it, and maybe they pick that up too, or Superman or anything, you know, just for the industry. And so I said that then if they really get interested and they want that next issue of G.I. Joe and the distribution is spotty on the newsstand, they'll find a comic book shop. And then we got them.
And you see, I'm 40 now, and you got me with Secret Wars. I went to the comics shop off the spinner rack. I went looking for comics. How do we fix it now?
Well, I think that. Well, you know, like I said, the powers at Marvel always started leaning toward all direct, which was, in their words, shooting fish in a barrel. Okay, and so I always resisted. I mean, I even proposed that we had done direct market exclusive comics. The first one was Dazzler, and it sold 428,000 copies, all direct. So I said, let's do an all exclusive newsstand book. And I couldn't win that fight because Ed Shukin and Carol Kalish said, oh no, they'd be so mad. I said, yeah, and then they'd go to the newsstand and buy the books, you know, or they'd go to the ID and buy them at a discount. But you know, and then they'd be mad for a while, and then that comic book would go up in value, and all the store owners would be glad. And you know, I said, you know, but anyway, I couldn't win that fight. And then shortly after I left Marvel, not too long after I left Marvel, they abandoned the newsstand and they went all direct. And guess what? The direct market, it just started killing them because they were the only way out. They had all the cards. So anyway, the thing was, this business has almost gone out of business 3 times in my career. I was I had lunch with Will Eisner years ago, and I was telling him that. I said, you know, the business has almost died, you know, 3 times since I've been in it. He said, 8 times since I've been in it. And I said, well, you know, it just seems to me, Will, that every time it gets to the brink, 2 things happen. There's a revolution in distribution, and there's some creative surge. Like let's take the 1961, for instance. You know, yes, Stan and Jack and Steve, you know, the creative brilliance, that was the creative surge. And at the same time, Martin Goodman got distribution through the same distributor that DC used, so he had reasonably decent distribution. And so, you know, and then, you know, in the late 70s, when I was editor-in-chief, we had the direct market arise, so there was a revolution in distribution, and at Marvel and DC as well. Started introducing all these incentives, started paying people more, better people stayed with us, better people came to us, people who had left to go to do more profitable things like advertising came back to us, and all of a sudden you look around and there's Bill Sienkiewicz and Walt Simonson and Archie Goodwin and Larry Hama and like who's who of creators, and you know, so there was your creative thrust, you know. And so that happened. I think we need the same thing now. I think that electronic distribution is still evolving. Maybe that's it.
They say that's the new newsstand.
Yeah, maybe that's it. And it needs to be perfected. However, there's too much piracy. There's, you know, too much. I
wonder why well, it's to save the local comic shops. But should a digital book be $3.99 and a paper book be $3.99?
I don't know. I think that you probably would want the one that has the greatest reach to be a little less expensive.
Last one I've got is about the marriage of Spider-Man and Mary Jane. That was under your watch. Talk about that. The idea to marry the two.
Well, I was at a convention in Chicago, 1985, maybe, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, a convention in Chicago, and Stan was there as well, and. So walking down the hall, and Stan was scheduled to do a one-man panel, just him. And he sees me, and he runs over to me. He says, "Oh, you got to help me." And I was like, "What?" And he said, I'm going to be on this one-man, on stage, one-man panel. He said, and I know what they're going to do. They're going to ask me questions about the comics, and I'm not up to date on the comics because he was out in Hollywood at that point, working on, and also working at Marvel Productions and so forth. He says, come on and do it with me. And I said, well, all right, I said, you don't think they'll mind? He says, they're going to tell us no, And I said, okay, we'll do it. So we went up there and we made a great tag team because all the questions were about comics, okay? What was going on in the comics. So I would answer the fact part of the question, and then Stan would tell some anecdote about, like Thor. Yeah, he'd be Stan, and we had a great act there. We were doing great. And
who was the straight man? Were you the straight man?
Well, I was the straight man, and Stan would do all the, or except sometimes I'd throw in a funny comment on one of his anecdotes. But at any rate, so to get into the end, we're taking some questions, and right at the end, somebody raises their hand, and the question was, Stan, when is Peter Parker going to get married to Mary Jane, right? And Stan said, well, he said, I'm not involved with the comics so much anymore. That's entirely up to Jim. Well, Jim, can we do it? And he puts me on the spot right there. He says, Stan is asking me, could we please have them get married? Well, what am I going to say to Stan Lee? No, you jerk. So I said, well, if you're willing, I said, we could do it together. You could do it in the syndicated strip, and we could do it, in the comics at the same time. And the roar of applause in the room, and Stan shakes my hand, and then we started doing it. Now, we really wanted to coordinate the strip and the comics, and for a lot of logistical reasons, that didn't quite work out. But he got married in both venues, and it came out all right.
And in the ballpark too.
Yes, at Shea Stadium, and it was.
Some people that aren't a fan of the marriage say the two weren't right for each other. Gwen was the true love. What's your opinion?
Well, I kind of agree, and the thing is, that's something I liked about Marvel Comics is that, when I would read DC Comics way back in the, late 50s, early 60s, pretty much like, the first issue of every comic, the hero's already met the love of his life. There's the hero, there's Iris West, there's, and so forth. And there's never any problems about that, except that what's his name, the Flash guy was always late for everything. They were like gimmicks, gimmicky stuff. And when Peter Parker starts out, he doesn't have any girlfriend at all, and then he meets Betty Brant. That doesn't work out, and it's like life, And the fact that the love of his life died, well, what's he going to do? He's going to go on, and here's Mary Jane, Tiger. So Anyway, I thought that was okay. I was all right with that. But
to go to the thing about what Matlow said, do you think that changed the character too much? Took him from the everyman to, people assume that once you get married, everything's blissful.
Right.
But he didn't have the romantic tension. What do you think? Did it change the character too much?
Well, it didn't have to. I think to some extent it did, and it shouldn't have. But because I think that. A good writer takes that, and it's a shift in the dynamic, but there's still plenty of material to work with there, and so I think that it probably flummoxed the writers a little, but I think if they had done it right, I left at about that time. I wasn't involved, so I think if they should have called me, I would have told them what to do.
Well, years later, he made a deal with the devil, and they undid the marriage. What do you think of that?
I think that sucks.
Exactly, I agree.
Yeah, I think, once you start pulling tricks like that, then you can't believe anything. I mean, I had a rule that when a character died, they stayed dead. And on two occasions, I allowed that rule to be semi-violated. One was with Elektra Assassin, and Frank and Denny wanted to bring her back, and I said no. And they said, well, here's how we'd like to do it. And they explained this whole thing about other people giving up their lives and kind of reanimating her. And you're never quite sure if it's really her in there. Yeah. And I said,
ambiguous, yeah.
I can live with that.
Yeah.
All right. And then with Phoenix, they convinced me Jean Grey is dead, but Phoenix isn't. And all right, Phoenix. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so when Phoenix came back, it wasn't Jean Grey. So that's how they sold that to me. I said, all right, as long as Jean Grey stays dead, I'm all right with that. and the character's name is Phoenix.
Yeah.
So rising again is nothing unusual.
All right, we've got a couple questions from our message board. Big Al, I believe your EIC tenure was the best era Marvel ever had. Just want to throw that out there. Were you in charge now? What would you do differently than what Marvel's doing now?
First of all, I would once again try to get things to come out on time on a regular basis. I think that's very important. I would get ahead enough on the books so we didn't have that possibility of missing an issue or something, or it being delayed. I understand that Marvel has some pretty strict restraints on live inventory, meaning they can't have 4 in the drawer like DeFalco used to have. No, not fill-ins. 4 issues in the drawer, 4 issues ahead. Not fill-ins, regular continuity. And so I would try to get the thing on time, and I would also try to get them back to storytelling. Nowadays, with Marvel Comics being $4, and
Be 5.
and they're doing this decompressed storytelling where, I started reading the new Miles Morales Spider-Man. And at the end of 3 issues, he still wasn't in the costume, and every cover had him in the costume, but in the issues, he was still just discovering that he could stick to walls and stuff.
You're out $12.
You're out $12, and how many? You could be out $50, $48 before you get to the end of that first story, that Stan did in 2 pages. Now, I'm not saying it should be done in 2 pages, but I mean, if you read those old comics, or if you even read the stuff that I did at Valiant, which I was trying to be like Stan in terms of having a good bit of content in each issue. When I put down a Marvel comic in the middle 60s there, I felt like I'd been to a fantastic movie. I mean, it was a great story, and there was lots of it, and it didn't seem crowded. It's because, they knew how to pace. And I think these days, the guy's pace is kind of glacial, and I think that hurts him. So I try to, get back to telling stories, telling well, and making them on time, and trying to get people interested in the characters again, as opposed to the gimmicks and the reboots and all that.
There's more than just comics nowadays. They've got the movies, they've got the toys, etc. They're competing for what medium, I guess.
See, it shouldn't be that way. I mean, like when Star Wars was a huge hit movie, the sales of Star Wars comics and everything else Star Wars related skyrocketed. When the Incredible Hulk was on TV with Lou Ferrigno, it boosted the Hulk sales tremendously. Now the movies have no impact on the sales of the comics. Why? Because the comics really aren't like the movies, are they? I mean, you go to the movie, it's exciting, it's complex, it's not complicated, not confusing. It's complex, it's interesting, and you walk out of there feeling you've been told this great story, and a very intricate and beautiful story, and whereas you're still 10 issues into the Miles Morales and you haven't seen him put a suit on yet.
We've got Aziz. What Marvel Team Up 126, Spider-Man hands Bruce Banner money, and then the Hulk gives it to another one in need. Do you remember that story?
Yeah.
He's a hero? I don't know.
No, I think I called that the $5 bill, and it was an ironic play that you can't give more than all, and sometimes some little boost, turn your life around, help you, and that was the idea behind that story. That was a short story, right?
It was like a half comic, I think. It was split with Son of Satan, I think, or something. Jonathan, being responsible for Secret Wars, how do you feel about modern soulless comic book crossover events?
Well, I think Secret Wars was such a success. Next thing you know, DC's doing Crisis, and they claim they thought of it first. Their first issue came out the same day my last issue came out, and but then the crossovers every summer, every company had to do these giant crossovers. The only thing is, I think that they have become kind of soulless, because Secret Wars was integral to the Marvel Universe. I mean,
that you got the issue out and you had to read the whole mini to find out why Spider-Man got a black suit, why the Hulk did this, etc.
And yet, if you just picked up the Spider-Man, the first issue of Spider-Man that had the black suit, it didn't confuse you. You realized he had been away someplace, some alien world, and he came back with this new suit. Well, you know, I mean, okay, I can understand that. That's all you need to know. But you know, wouldn't it be nice to see the story that happened on the alien world?
Perfect. Make you buy 2 books.
Well, I mean, or make you interested in the limited series that you otherwise might ignore. And so we tried to make it integral to the Marvel Universe, you know, important to the Marvel Universe, part of the Marvel Universe. All the Marvel books ended with these in December with these characters being taken away somewhere. All the books in January had them coming back, and some of them had differences. Some of them had been changed. Some of them did. One of them didn't come back, and so forth. And so we made it something that was part of the continuity. Other people didn't want to work that hard, and frankly, and that's really it. Other people didn't work that hard, so they do this crossovers, and it really had nothing to do with the continuity, and it was completely detachable. And you know, it just didn't matter. And if actually you tried to make it matter, you'd just find it didn't make any sense at all.
Biggest biggest accomplishment as the editor at Marvel Comics?
I think making things more fair for the creators. I couldn't. I mean, Marvel, they own the characters. They were not going to back down on it being work for hire. And I said, well, then let's make it fair. It doesn't have to be bad work for hire. Let's make it fair work for hire. So we doubled the rates, and we doubled them again, and we kept raising the rates. We introduced the first what I called a continuity bonus. If you did so many issues in a row, you got $500. If you kept getting the $500 every, I don't know how many issues. We introduced the royalty program. And some of these guys became millionaires off of that royalty program. Todd McFarlane, one of them. We introduced health insurance for freelancers, and that's, you know, if you did 3 jobs a year, so you made $7,500, you qualified, and you had really good health care coverage. If we introduced life insurance, which came in very handy for Gene Day's family, you know. And again, all you had to do was do about 3 jobs a year, and you were covered. Then I said it's work for hire, and so therefore, part of the definition of work for hire is that the work for hire employee does not provide the materials, and so we started providing. We used to always provide paper, of course. We started providing pens, inks, pencils, erasers, whiteout. We paid for postage. We paid for all shipping. If I asked a guy to come to the office, we paid his train fare. We made it like, okay, it's work for hire. We own everything, but you're not. It's not going to be bad. Yeah, it's not going to be out of your pocket. It's not like you're bringing the leather to the shoe factory and then they own the shoes. Yeah. You know, we tried to make it good and fair, and also then we tried to offer the alternative. Yeah, you can work on Spider-Man, and that's guaranteed. You're going to make a lot of money, and you're going to have all these nice benefits and stuff. Or you can go work for Epic Comics, and you can bet on yourself. You own it. It's all yours. But it's not Spider-Man. It doesn't have that built-in sales appeal. You better be good. You better be good. And that worked out for like Jim Starlin with Dreadstar and some of the others, and some didn't work out.
Last question. Any Steve Ditko stories you can tell us?
Steve Ditko, I met him back during the Marvel days somewhere. I think I met him when Neil Adams was trying to organize the Guild, because Steve came to some of those meetings, and for reasons that are mysterious to me, I was invited. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, I'm a management. You know, what am I doing here with you guys starting a form a union? But Neil kept insisting. Neil and I are buddies. I mean, even through all of that, he was inviting me to his parties, and we're still friends. So I go over and get yelled at by him every once in a while. Yeah. Anyway, so I met him, and when I talked to him, I said, "Geez, I would love to have you come back. The door is always no." But eventually, he actually showed up, and well, he showed up, and we started talking, and eventually he started doing some things for us, and Rom primarily, and he seemed to be happy with it. He did great work, and we were just thrilled to have him back. and just wish I could have done that with everybody. I wish I could have done it with Jack. I wish I could have done it with anyone else. But from the old days. But then after I left Marvel, they stopped using him. And so I started a new company, Valiant, and he turned up on my doorstep one day and, was kind of looking for work. And we were doing wrestling comics then, not my idea. But I said, but Steve likes pure good guys and pure bad guys. And so there's wrestling for you, and yeah. So he actually enjoyed, I think, doing some of the wrestling stories. He did a great job, terrific job. And then later at Valiant, when we finally got around to doing My Superheroes, which is what I wanted to do in the first place, and got kind of torn off track by the board of directors, then he did Magnus for us for a while, because I convinced him that Magnus is a good guy, And he's all right. I'll do it. And we had Ralph Reese inking him, and God, it looked great. It was terrific. Anyway, so I've known him for a long time, and he's very, very fussy about what he does. He's a man of principle. He used to come into the office and say, "Hey, Steve, can I get you a cup of coffee?" And he'd say, "No, production before consumption."
Just a different cat, but a genius.
Oh no, I total respect for him. He is a genius. His old Spider-Man stuff taught me how to tell stories, and then probably helped me get my first job, because I studied his stuff and Jack's, and I just total respect for him, and just admire the man. And
she would do interviews. I've interviewed Stan. I haven't interviewed the other father.
He doesn't like to. We had at Valiant, we had trouble getting people because we didn't have that much money, and so we couldn't afford the Jim Lees of the world, So what we ended up with was we had a couple decent guys. We had decent. We had a couple really good guys. Barry Windsor-Smith. We had Don Perlin, who just doesn't get nearly the credit he deserves, and then we had David Lapham, who was like a discovery. He was delivering newspapers, when we found him, and and he kept sending us samples. But then we had a bunch of kids like right out of the Kubert School, and you had to show them which end of the brush to hold.
That green.
Yeah, really. But on the other hand, I have to say this for the Kubert School: every one of those kids had a total professional attitude. You asked them to do something, they said yes, sir, and they did it to the best of their abilities. They listened, they took direction, they all got better. Some of them became superstars. So anyway, and then we had old guys that nobody wanted. Now I'm an old guy now; nobody wants me, so I can relate. But we had these old guys who turned up, and like Stan Drake. Nobody wanted Stan Drake? Are you kidding me? And John Dixon, Australian artist, and he came over here hoping to get work. Nobody wanted him. Well, we'll take you. And so we had Steve Ditko, and anyway, we had all these old guys. So one day we decided to have Old Guy Day, and so we had I paid for it. We had a catered lunch, and we asked everybody to come in. And Stan Drake said he couldn't take the time. He had all this stuff he had to accomplish. And I said, "Well, you take lunch, don't you?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What if I have a car waiting at your door, and it brings you here, you eat lunch with us, and it takes you home, and maybe you lose, 40 minutes?" Yeah. He said, "All right, I'll do that." So he came down, and we're all there, and we're having a ball, and all these old guys. Turned out that Stan Drake was John Dixon's hero, and he'd never met him, and everybody was just thrilled to meet Steve, and everybody's having a great time, and the Cubies. Another thing about the Kubert School guys, total respect for their elders. They were just walking around with eyes like saucers, talking to these guys and listening to their stories and stuff. And we had a lousy catered lunch, and then so anyway, then everybody wants to take pictures. Steve would not allow us to take his picture, and he kept saying, he says, "It's about the work, it's not about me. I'm not going to do interviews. Don't you dare take my picture." I said, "Steve, it's me. I'm not going to take your picture. No way." And so we couldn't take a picture of him, and it's very sad.
What can we look forward to in the future from you? What are you working on these days?
Well, I've been doing advertising stuff, commercial comics, for a while. I'm also, I pick and choose. I don't do that much. I'm not doing anything mainstream right now, but I've got a couple conversations underway, let's say, and so something may come along, and if it's really interesting, I'd really like to do.
I enjoyed
get back
your
in there.
I enjoyed your website when you were doing the questions.
Oh yeah, www.jimshooter.com. You gotta type the 3 W's.
There you go.
And there's all kinds of old stories and stuff on there, and I might start that again.
Jim, it was a pleasure and an honor. Very nice to talk to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.